For the invitation. Thank you to the Historical Commission, Park Historical Commission as well. My name is Greg Lattanzi, and I'm the curator, like was mentioned before, of the New Jersey State Museum, which unfortunately were closed. But I hope that this presentation will give you some insight and some information and something that you didn't know about New Jersey's people that were here prior to European conquest, colonialism. And so I have a number of slides that I'm going to show, and I can do that quickly. Okay, great. So I've done this talk, or a variation of this talk, many times, and I always like to bring it local when I'm asked by either a historical commission or a county organization to be able to, sort of let the audience look at what we know about the area. So towards the end of the presentation, I'm going to show you a little bit about Middlesex County and the Highland Park Borough specifically, and you can get an idea of what's going on, or what we know was going on in that area. Oh, I think I have to click. Yes. Okay. So obviously, 20,000 years ago, most of North America was covered in ice. There were a number of areas where native peoples came across. If you all know about the Bering Strait, they came through a corridor, or now archaeologists are realizing that we're finding sites along the coast. Because of climate change, we're seeing sites eroding out of the bank along Alaska and Canada. Now, for those of you, you may have known that there was an ice sheet. It was like 1.5 miles high, so it was compact. And those lines on your screen, on the screen that you can see, were the extent of 3 different pushes of the ice sheet. Obviously, the first one was the pre-Illinoisan, 800,000 years ago. The last one was the Wisconsin, which, as you can see, made a nice little lobe around the Perth-Amboy area. And what this did was push all sorts of material to that edge, including stone, rocks, cobbles that native peoples used for tool manufacture. But also it washed out a lot of other material as well. Now, I'm sure most of you have been to the shore, whether Asbury Park or even Cape May, on both the bay and the ocean side. And you can see this extension of the continental shelf. So if you were standing on the boardwalk at Asbury Park about 12,000 years ago, you would not be hitting the water. You'd have to go another 100 miles until you actually reach the ocean. And this is important because, after the ice sheet starts to melt, the sea level rises, and we have the ocean at where it is today. All of the sites, archaeological sites that native peoples were out on that shoreline, they're buried. And if you have, looked over the past couple of years in the newspapers, that people are finding arrowheads, projectile points on the beach washed up. And that's because the constant churning underneath the water are disturbing these sites, as well as machines coming up to pick up sand for beach replenishment. So one of the things that we look at when we study Native peoples and where the sites are located, we need to have an understanding of the geography, geology of the state. And New Jersey is pretty interesting because it has 5 different what are called physiographic provinces. And most of New Jersey, as you can see, consists of the coastal plain, which is very flat. And as you move north from central Jersey, Trenton, you get into the Piedmont, it's a little hilly, and then you get into the Highlands and the Valley and Ridge provinces. Um, and so as you go north, you go higher in elevation, there's different resources, um, as well as different plants, different trees surviving in different climates. You got the pine barrens, so small dwarf pines, and then in the North Jersey, you have um, different types of plants. And what's also striking is where Trenton is located in the Delaware River. That is the head of tide for the Delaware River. And so the falls, which are the falls of the Delaware, that is the highest point of navigation. Um, Most of the rivers on the ocean and the Delaware are tidal, which is really important for Native peoples because of all of the fish resources and plant resources that are in that water. So about 11,000 years ago, we find many different kinds of sites for what are called Paleo-Indians. The lithic resources, like I mentioned, are going to be small to large cobbles, boulders. They're mostly nomadic. So they're going across the landscape following large game. So mastodon and mammoth, but not so much. Other large animals like um, the giant beaver, which New Jersey had a giant beaver, which stood about 6 foot tall. And yes, they were crazy, big, huge, nasty teeth and everything. Um, and the climate at that point was cool, temperate, and mixed, and that sort of almost the way Canada is today was what we were dealing with back then. This is one of the typical points, spear points that the Paleo-Indians would use, and you can see it's unique because it has at the base up to the midpoint, it has what's called a flute taken out or a flake, specifically in a long pattern. And this one was actually excavated from a site along the Delaware River on the Pennsylvania side, right where the Delaware Water Gap, the Pennsylvania Visitor Center is right now. And they actually dated this because this point was in a charcoal feature, and they were about to actually date it to around 12,900, give or take a couple hundred years. So you can see here's some of the cobbles that are used to make some of these points, and you'll find them in stream beds as an outwash, just like the glaciers outwashing all of this material. So some of the point finds that we have, and one of the things at New Jersey State Museum is we have recorded sites for the entire state. And so I was able to put on a map all the finds of Paleo-Indian sites and or individual locations of points where they were found. And you can see where they're located, either all along the coast of the Atlantic coast or all along the Delaware River. And so obviously water is an extremely important asset for Native peoples. As we get to 8,000, 5,000, different time period, obviously. It's called the Archaic. And we start to see the glaciers are now way into Canada. The oceans are starting to rise. We're getting obviously warmer temperatures. Native peoples are moving more on the landscape, but they're staying near water. They're not the big game is gone. they're starting in the early period, early Archaic, they're starting to change their point types. And towards the late Archaic, we start to see more interest in um, burying the dead with artifacts. So there's actually some sort of, um, social memory as to that there's an importance to an individual in life and in death. Um, and here you can see we're actually changing into warm temperate forests. So we're getting different kinds of trees, deciduous trees. We're getting trees that can be chopped down and used for constructing houses and or canoes for travel. And you can see here, this is the different types of points. Whereas before it was a flute, now you've got the base has a stem on it, or it's got points. We call them bifurcate points. And that's just a different way of attaching the, the point to a handle, whether it's a long spear handle or whether it's a small knife handle kind of, where they would just attach it a different way. And we also start to see them, native peoples use different types of stone, particularly cherts. This example right here shows the difference in how a cobble, which is in the upper middle, and you can see the point made out of that one cobble, and all of the flakes that were taken off to make that point. And they're all different sizes. A lot of times that's usually what archaeologists find in the ground is just the flakes. We never find a whole point like that. No matter what you see in the movies, it doesn't turn out that way. And so at the late Archaic, we have a number of sites in New Jersey, which are in the red dots there. And one in particular is Savage Farm, where they found cremated human remains with a number of artifacts in the little cremated bundle. And that's the first time, especially in New Jersey and a little in the middle Atlantic region, we start to see extensive cemeteries of individuals cremated with artifacts buried with them for a ritual purpose. And most of those sites, with a few exceptions, are along that in the coastal plain, either inner or the outer coastal plain. Now, about 5000 to 1 AD, the late Archaic to early Woodland transition, it's like to call, we start to see some really drastic changes in native people and how they lived. And that basically starts with the introduction of pottery. Their settlements are semi-permanent, so they have a home base and they'll move out to hunt and collect resources and then come back to that home base. We start to see trade with other groups locally within the state and out of the state, sometimes as far away as Ohio. We find stone lithics made into points that are found in New Jersey that are actually, the lithic material only exists in Ohio. And so we also see many different shapes of artifacts. Susquehanna broad spears, a lot of jasper, another kind of chert material. Other stemmed points, you can see Bear Island. Most of the names of the points are named after the location of where it was found, which is pretty typical. So here we are, we're sort of in the vegetation area of seasonal trees, deciduous conifers. The temperature is pretty much the same as it is now. So there's summer, spring, fall, and winter. The transition to pottery probably came from existing containers. So wood, bark, and wicker baskets are then transferred into clay. And we see a lot of that also with soapstone, with steatite. those kinds of lithic materials that retain heat. So you can put it, as you can see in the upper right, directly on a fire and cook. And the early pottery, like the vessel down on the lower right, has steatite chunks in it as a temper, so that when you cook something in it, the heat is also retained, but the steatite chunks help the pot when you actually fire the pot before you use it, so that it doesn't fall apart or explode. And we find impressions on pottery, either netting or, as you can see in the left-hand side, basketry, which for archaeologists, it's really telling as far as time period goes, what kind of materials they're using. Sometimes we also see different types of stone used as a temper as well. Sometimes stone occurs as outcrops within the ground that can be extracted. Rhyolite specifically occurs between Maryland and Pennsylvania, where that red arrow is showing, and that's the only source of it. And we do see trade of this material in upstate New York, New Jersey, down in Virginia as well. So we know that there's lots of movement of either New Jerseyans or just this material moving back and forth. We also see a lot of social gathering of people, especially along major rivers like the Delaware or the Raritan, doing activities that not only are they getting resources like, say, fish, but they're also exchanging ideas and also getting spouses and then going back to their own locations. And that's when we start to see sort of complexity, in the sense that there are organized groups of people with a purpose, exchanging ideas, exchanging people, exchanging artifacts back and forth. Now, the Middle Woodland is the highest form of, it's in New Jersey, where we have complexity. We have a lot of artifacts from all over the Midwest, the Northeast. And we are pretty much as we are today, as far as the temperature, the climate, everything is the same. We start to see boundaries of native peoples, depending on, and the way we figure that out is based on either ceramics, because we start to see ceramics that have designs on them, and they're within their own geographic boundary. There might be some exchange back and forth, but specifically in the Delaware Valley, you can see that there's a specific demarcation of a group of people that are using the same ceramics for a couple hundred years, and then it goes away. One of the ways we find that out is looking at some of the residues on the inside of those designed ceramics, and we find plants being cooked in those pots, and we can identify what kind of plants are being eaten or cooked, what kind of fish are being used. And that's one of the great things about sites along the Delaware or the Raritan. You get different types of fish that live in fresh water and spawn in salt water, or live in salt water and spawn in fresh water. And so at certain points of the year, you have literally millions of fish. And, if you know exactly when that is, you just basically stand in the middle of the water and start catching. And, fish meat is extremely nutritious and protein rich and full of vitamins and minerals and things like that. And so we start to see artifacts that resemble artifacts of native peoples that we have records from that do fishing 100% of their time. So Northwest Coast, they have pretty much blades like this that are used to cut fish during this time period. Wrong thing. oops. And like I said, the pottery, we start to see extremely amazing designs like this one here. Almost looks like it's a rug or a carpet with or a woven mat with lots of designs. And they occur pretty much in certain sites, mostly in New Jersey, at the Abbott Farm National Historic Landmark, which is just south of Trenton. Um, Now this, interestingly enough, are ceramics that were collected by Mr. Smolka, who's from New Brunswick area. I can't remember. He came to the museum about 5 or so years ago. Um, and he showed us these ceramics, which are extremely amazing and important because they show not only Abbottonian size, but connections to Ohio in the Hopewell period, which are extremely important. And we need to make more of that connection with those groups. And I think we sort of have done that with that kind of material. And so basically, to get towards the end of the talk, we have what's the late Woodland period, where we have the introduction of the bow and arrow, which again, like pottery, changes everything. They're able to hunt all sorts of animals, replenish arrows because they're making them with small little cobbles. The arrowheads, triangle arrowheads, are very, very small, so they can use any kind of material they can. And it's like these little rocks, basically, they just hit it. They don't need to have specialized tools to make these arrowheads. So we find them all over. And we start to see villages, large longhouses or wickiups, like in the lower left, lots of canoes for water travel. And then more crazy pottery. So the late Woodland period, there's a lot of influence with Iroquois up in the north. We start to see in the South Jersey, we start to see very thin pottery, but very well designed, like that. Okay, so, and I know I'm running out of time because I said 20 minutes. So anyway, so in Middlesex County, there are 288 registered archaeological sites that are registered with the State Museum. And in Highland Park Borough itself, there's only one of those sites registered, unfortunately. So here is a map of Middlesex County that has all of the sites marked on it. And one of the things you see right away is, oh, that's interesting. A lot of these sites are located next to water, which obviously is important. So the very southern portion of the county, they're along, I can't remember that river, but they're along that one, the Raritan, obviously up above, in the middle, along Keyport, along the coast there. So that's one of the main resources that, Native peoples need is fresh water. So here is Highland Park, and there's that one site, MI 240. Now, unfortunately, it's a historic site, so it's not a prehistoric site. There are a number of prehistoric sites outside. So if you look at the lower right-hand corner, MI 001, that's a very large prehistoric site that was identified by Dorothy Cross. So that's site 240, MI 240 was, I'm sure most of you know, I don't know a whole bunch about them, only what I read on the site form. So this was for a development off of River Road. Bravo was a professional metal detecting group, was hired by archaeologists to come in and do, because they knew that there was a Revolutionary War encampment there. They found lots of Revolutionary War shot, some buttons, maybe 1 or 2 coins. If any of you are familiar with Raritan Landing, that's over to the left as well. But one of the interesting finds, and I'll end with this, one of the interesting finds at that MI 240 was a ring. It was a gold ring. It's a 14 karat gold. And I say this because if there's someone on listening to this program It would be great to talk to you afterwards if you know anything about this. So the site was originally a Johnson property. So Johnson and Johnson, obviously from New Brunswick. So the ring itself is that picture right there. It was a small gold seal ring having a cockerel over a banner inscribed. That's Latin, I'm not going to say it. Difficulties be damned. And the motto and the insignia for the Johnson family is this cockerel with that inscription. And this was found under the ground on that property. And it looks like a pinky ring. It's very small unless the person had a small hand. But anyway, whether it's a prehistoric site or a historic site, the objects that we find really not only help tell a story, but they are the connection that we have with an individual or a group of people. And for archaeologists, that's basically the thing we need to be able to tell the story what happened at a particular site. So I thank you very much for the opportunity to speak to you this evening, and I'll be happy to spend as much time as I can before my wife kicks me off to answer any questions.
Thank you so much, Greg. That was really great. You may not want to close out your presentation yet.
Oh, okay. I will put it up then.
Great. Because we had a couple questions actually that
yeah, sure.
Reference some of the images in there. We do have quite a few questions actually. So going back to actually one of your very first slides, Drea, who's also a historical commission member on the call, she wanted to know what type of stone was used for that one. Yeah. And I don't know if there's a common theme of like a type of stone that is used, but maybe you could talk about that a little.
So most of the lithic material for Paleo-Indian are gonna be like cherts or jaspers, which are, the technical term is cryptocrystalline. They're easily flaked and they're very, very strong. And so I believe this one is a chert, but you could see the darkness. It was burned. It was found in a fire, found in a fire pit, a charcoal pit. And that's how they were able to date it. They used that charcoal to date it. There are a couple of Paleo-Indian points that are made out of quartzite, which is different from quartz, that were found in South Jersey and Cumberland County. It's very, very difficult to make these, let alone in an easy material like chert. Quartzite, forget it. But most of the ones we find in the mid-Atlantic area, so Pennsylvania, Virginia, Maryland, Delaware, are going to be cherts, jaspers, materials from New York, but they're all part of that family.
So we shouldn't think we can just like pick up a rock and make one of these. Probably not.
No.
Got it. Okay. Right. So one of the next questions was someone wanted to know, where did they find the copper? I guess you might have shown something that you said was made of copper.
No, but I've done research on copper, but so New Jersey has a number of locations where there is copper occurring in thin sheets in trap rock. But there are many, many historical references to drift copper or float copper. So just like the glacier has underground rivers that outwash stone, they also outwash copper nuggets. There was a historic reference of a guy in New Brunswick who had a farm, and his enslaved person was tilling the fields and found a 50-pound copper nugget. And it was significant enough that they wrote about it in 1850 or something like that, 1830. And so we know historically that there, and even across the Midwest, there's copper, drift or float copper that's found all over the place.
Interesting. That must have caused a little bit of a chink in the armor of the when they found that 50-pound piece of copper. Oh my gosh. So another question that I think a bunch of people might want to know the answer to that Drea asked was, where can you find more information about the MI 240 site, or I guess maybe any of those other on that map that you showed, all those sites? Is there a place where the public can go to learn more about those sites?
So yes and no. So the role of what's called the site registration program at the State Museum is for researchers, scholars that can come if they're doing projects, can research, and the public as well. However, we try not to have they can come in and do the research. We just may want to make sure that they don't publish it in a way that the general public can find it and go, oh, I'm going to go to that site and start digging.
Dig it up, right?
Right, exactly. So we don't promote that, but the State Museum is open, or at least I'm open, to be able to give information for people if they want to learn a little bit more about the site itself. So like say for MI 240, we have a site form that was filled out by the archaeologists, and it includes, information about the time period, a little description about what they found. The State Historic Preservation Office, which is under DEP, the Department of Environmental Protection in Trenton, the archaeologists and historic preservationists there, they also review those projects. I don't review them, which is great because I don't need that extra hassle. So they review the projects, and they have the reports that the archaeologists and historic structure people write. And so they review them, and those are open to the public as well, as long as you make an appointment with them to see. So you could go and read the report that was done for that project, or any project in Middlesex.
And they would just contact the State Historic Preservation Office,
right,
for that? Okay.
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
Great. So just for anyone who doesn't know, basically every state in the country has a State Historic Preservation Office, and you can just Google NJ SHPO, NJ SHPO, and you'll find it, and you can contact them if you wanted to get the reports that Greg is talking about.
Right. I think that's one of the really good things about a historical commission in a town or a county or whatever, is that as an organization, you can request those reports for your borough and keep them like as a resource.
Have them on file. Yeah, we could definitely do that.
Absolutely.
That's a very good point.
Yeah, that way they're in one place, and when when something comes up, you have resources to go, oh, we know that there's something here.
Mm-hmm.
So that way you at least have that information at hand.
Yeah, that's a great point. We will get on that. And so we have maybe two more questions, and then we'll probably, unless anyone else has more, wrap it up. So Deborah Powell is asking, what is the best place to view the mini sink collections that were that I don't know about this, but the Minisink collections that were removed by Hayes at a grave site and Minisink Island. Do you know what she's
yes. So those are no longer available, at least that particular site, because those most of that material is from burials. And so the Smithsonian, which is where they are, the Museum of the American Indian, when Hay and Pepper dug that site, in Sussex County along the Delaware River, just south of Minisink Island. That material falls under what's called NAGPRA, which is the Native American Graves Protection and Repatriation Act. So as of 1991, all of the human remains and associated funerary objects that are buried with the individual or could be associated with any individual are considered federal property, and the museums have to get in touch with the federally recognized tribes and initiate the repatriation process. So all of that will get, reburied somewhere.
Yes, that could be a whole nother, I feel like talking about that could be a whole nother
Oh, yes.
Presentation. Okay, so we have a couple more questions. Let's see. Drea is asking, you were talking about home-based settlements and how long would a settlement see continuous use? Would it be several generations? No.
That's a very good question, because a lot of times when excavating in the ground, the occupation levels sometimes get deflated. So it's hard unless you have the diagnostic evidence to be able to say it is a couple hundred years or it's only one time. That's why if there are pits around, we can look through the pits and find identifiable markers that tell us time period. But I think when we look at one site along a river drainage and then find additional sites, we can reconstruct that larger picture. And sometimes that happens if we have the luxury of time ourselves as researchers, but most of the time archaeologists are going from one project to another because they're building McMansions, or they're doing a pipeline, and they don't get to sit down.
So that's actually how the reason why a lot of archaeological digs might even happen in the first place is because something else is coming in to be built there.
Yes.
So you're doing what research you can, and it's not just it's not like how it looks on Indiana Jones or whatever.
Right. Or like it's sort of there's the academic part of it where
right.
You have the luxury, I guess, of thinking big picture, because they're just moving from one project to the other, doing that kind of archaeological consulting, which I did for many years. And that's how when you start out, you can actually pay the rent, right? So that's one of the good things about having a goal of where I want it to be or end up, is now I can do that. And one of the ways that I learn more is by giving presentations like this, where I can listen to questions to be able to go, oh yeah, I didn't think about that. So
great. Well, we appreciate you coming to present for us. So we still have more questions coming in. So
I can stop whenever you want to stop.
Okay. Well, we said to go until 7, so we still have a few more minutes.
Okay.
And I really want to ask one of these. Someone's asking, based on the artifacts, what do you know about the diet and early agriculture of indigenous people in the area? Anything, it's some basic stuff that we understand, like hunting and fishing, but is there anything else, and anything that people kind of have, I'm curious to know, like kind of misperceptions about? And we are thinking of having some kind of event in November, because November is Thanksgiving, and we're all thinking about food. So we were thinking of having some kind of history and food combined event. So I'm particularly interested to know about that.
Yeah, I mean, most of the information we know about foods are from historical records, historical documents. It's only been recently where, like I mentioned, the pottery and the charred remains on the inside have been able to be analyzed to see what kind of things were being cooked in the pot. There was a site, if anybody knows where 95 crosses the Delaware River, north of Trenton, the Scudder's Falls area, Scudder's Falls Bridge, yeah. Yeah, there was a site, since they were redoing the bridge, they had to excavate on both sides, Jersey and Pennsylvania, um, where they were going to put the new abutments. And they found a whole pot. It was broken, but it was a whole vessel. But inside it was like completely charred with stuff. And so they were able to find out that in that they've had nothing but remains from cattails. So they were cooking that plant. Now, whether or not they were eating it or maybe using it for medicinal purposes, we don't know. But they were using that for something. There's also another individual who, I can't remember where the site was, but they found one of the plants I showed was arrow arum. And you can still see the plant today. It grows on the edge of a marsh or an estuary, and it's got a leaf that looks like an arrow. But what it is the tuber at the bottom, the ball, is like a potato. And it's so rich, starch and carbs, and so they have to boil it because it's a little toxic, but then you can eat it. And that was found also charred. And like I mentioned with pottery, when the pottery started, that's one of the really interesting things we start to see is, and you don't think about it, but it's one of those things like, oh, why didn't I even think about that? So when pottery starts, we have a huge explosion in population. And you're like, why is that? Well, the reason is with pottery, you're able to cook directly on a fire. You're able to make mushes and soups in a stably on a fire in a pot. And what does that do? You're able to feed an infant and they can digest this food. Wow. Thereby, the infant survives, right? So it's like, wow, what a concept. And so that's why the population increases, because you're able to feed and the infants are able to survive.
Such a simple thing.
Yeah.
Just having a vessel to cook food in.
Right, because you can cook in steatite, but you're only heating like what? Meat, and you can make a gruel, but it's going to be really difficult. But with a pot, you can really do it over a period of time and directly on the fire.
Yeah, you can really do some cooking.
Yes.
Let's see. Someone is asking about Chenopodium.
Chenopodium?
Chenopodium? Mm-hmm. Was that grown agriculturally?
Later, yeah. What originally we start to see, agriculture starts as a mistake, like, in the large pit of waste, and plants start to regrow, and you're like, oh wow, this is kind of interesting. I mean, when I moved into my house, when I first moved to the Philly area, the one fall we started seeing these squash things growing in the yard. Somebody must have dumped seeds, and I had these wonderful squash things. And so I just took the seeds and started replanting them. So Chenopodium is that way as well. It's one of those early plants that we see being not sort of domesticated and then used. Wild rice is another one, which you can still see today in certain estuaries, is wild rice, which also occurs inside pots as charred remains.
Very interesting. Let's see, do we have any other questions? Karen is asking, could you just scroll to the slide that has those plants on it real quick?
Yeah.
And then Drea is asking, were there any particular environmental events that we know of that were, impacted populations in a big way, such as like an earthquake or something like that?
The only one that we know of is the Little Ice Age. So when that occurred, it everything was a lot colder. I believe that there was, I'm trying to think if we can tell that in some of the soils. And one of the other things about archaeology is we need, archaeologists have to have a real understanding of soils and soil development, because while artifacts are great, we also need to know how the soil accumulates, because that's how sites get buried. And so we're able to take a look at where those events occurred and see if we can see them in the record, in the profile, like a little ice age, because I think it only lasted for a couple hundred years. So it may be a small little blip. We may not even find it, but as far as we know, there was not that much of a change to living. There might have been more of a, maybe like the lean years or starving time, where there weren't that many animals because of the temperature drop. But it's really hard to say, because that occurs so quickly, and it doesn't make much of an impact on the archaeological record.
Right. The only way you would know is if it was something so significant that, that gave a shock, I guess, to the system, that it left a mark of some kind.
Yeah, if it was a lot longer time period, we would have, seen something like that, like more burials, which we don't.
Mhm.
So
So maybe they got lucky, didn't have anything crazy going on, besides all the other things that I'm sure they had to deal with. So sorry, I missed one question earlier. And I think there was a couple questions I saw about clay and ceramic. So it's good to ask this. Patricia is saying she didn't see painted vessels among some of the photos that you were showing in the ceramics, and in the prehistoric Southwest, there's a variety of black on white ceramics. So why is there a lack of that in New Jersey or the Midwest?
they did. There's some in Ohio and maybe Kentucky. There's some red that is used as a paint, like an ochre, but that was not something that they did, especially in New Jersey or most of the Middle Atlantic. There's no paints. The only type of painting or color we see is red ochre being used as a for burials, for specifically really elaborately adorned burials as part of the ritual. And also, even there's a number of other cultures that burnish the pot, the clay, which is rubbing it so it has a smooth, shiny surface. They didn't do that either. What we do have, starting in whatever period, I guess, middle woodland or just before, you can start to see just the incising or decoration. We have a lot of cord paddle. It might be just something to do with the clays or the culture. They just, they don't have the dyes to be able to do that. It wasn't their thing, because we don't even see it in the late woodland when Europeans arrive. We don't even see them painting their pots then, where they're able to have, or not maybe not readily accessible, but it's there.
They would
They
have
can get their
known
hands on it.
of
They're
it.
just not using it.
Yeah. And the clay, someone asked, I think, is it local clay? I'm assuming obviously they were using what they had available to them. So because they're asking, like, what is the comparison to our clay, like the dirt now in our ground in Highland Park, that does kind of look red? So is that like the same, basically?
Yeah, basically, archaeologists have done like experiments where they've gone to, the Raritan River, and on the side just collected clay and used that to see how it works. There's many different kinds of well, there's two main types of clay that are found naturally. There's original raw clay, which has to be processed, and then there's secondarily deposited clay, which is clay that is gone through like a flooding event, which has it has organics in it, which has sort of been processed already by the rivers. And so the trick is to get whatever temper you have or want to include, whether it's crushed shell, burned and crushed shell, or whether it's steatite or mica, which is the sheet mineral that occurs crushed up, and you can add that to it, because you can't just fire clay, raw clay, natural occurring clay, because it'll explode. So you have to add something to it that'll mimic the clay and expand. And when it's fired, it can solidify and harden, and then you can cook in it.
So there must have been some trial and error when they were first learning.
It's so interesting how they figured out that, oh, I can put shell in it, but I have to burn the shell in a fire and I got to crush it.
Yeah.
So it's like, yeah, it's pretty amazing.
Yeah, a lot of trial and error happening there. Some different experiments going on. So I think we're probably going to wrap up now. We recorded this whole event, and we're going to be making the recording available to the public. Someone's asking if you can share your PowerPoint, so I don't know if you can do that or not. But if you can't, we do have a recording of it. But if you can, we can, share it with everyone who registered.
Yeah, I could do that. I'll
Great.
If you want, I could like PDF it and then send it to you.
Great. Okay. Well, so yes, for whoever asked that, we will send this out and make it available to everyone. And we'll also make the recording available. So thank you, Greg, so much for giving us this presentation and answering all of our questions. We really appreciate it. And thank you everyone else for attending and for asking all of your questions. And we hope you have a good night. And yeah, so thank you very much.
Thank you, everyone.